The night was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that seemed to stretch beyond the trees and swallow everything in sight. My dad, Michael, and I had been driving home from my aunt's house in rural Virginia, a stretch of road that was long, quiet, and often unsettling in its silence. I was 17 at the time, a restless teenager who preferred blasting music in my headphones instead of listening to the eerie hum of tires rolling over cracked asphalt. Dad had insisted on taking the old highway rather than the interstate because he thought it was faster. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if fate pushed us onto that road. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. Every so often, the headlights would catch a raccoon or deer darting across the road, their eyes glowing like tiny lanterns. I remember leaning against the window, feeling the hum of the car beneath me, when Dad spoke up. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Jake," he said, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Just tired," I muttered, not looking at him. We didn't always talk much. My dad and I had a good relationship, but like most fathers and teenage sons, there were silences between us that neither of us felt the need to fill. That night, however, silence felt heavier, almost unnatural. We were maybe 20 miles from home when the first strange thing happened. Out of nowhere, the radio, which had been turned off the entire trip, crackled to life. Static filled the car, sharp and loud, making me jump. Dad quickly reached over and shut it off, muttering about old wiring. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stared at the radio dial, half expecting it to flicker back on. It didn't, but the unease lingered. The road ahead stretched into darkness, flanked by thick trees that seemed to lean inward as if trying to swallow the path. We were driving along a bend when Dad suddenly slowed down. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward slightly, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "What is it?" I asked. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I sat up straight, scanning the road. At first, I saw nothing. But then, in the faint glow of the headlights, I caught it. Shadows. They weren't people, not really, but they had shapes, tall, thin, darker than the night itself. They moved across the road like smoke caught in the wind, but there was no wind. Their movement was deliberate, almost human. The car rolled to a stop. Neither of us spoke. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure Dad could hear it. The figures didn't scatter like animals would. They didn't vanish when the headlights hit them. Instead, they lingered, drifting across the road slowly, as though they had all the time in the world. Dad reached for the gear shift, but his hand trembled slightly. "Must be fog," he muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced. Fog didn't move like that. Fog didn't stretch into shapes with arms and heads. Fog didn't turn to look at you. But that's exactly what one of the figures did. I swear on everything I know, one of the shadows paused and turned toward us. Its face, if you could call it that, was a hollow darkness, but I felt its gaze like a weight pressing against my chest. My breath caught. I wanted to say something, but no words came. "Dad," I finally whispered. "I see it," he replied, his voice low, strained. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures melted into the trees, vanishing into the darkness between the branches. Dad exhaled, long and shaky, then pressed on the gas. The car lurched forward, and I kept my eyes glued to the window, watching for any sign of movement. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. My hands were cold, my palms damp. Dad's jaw was set, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Finally, I broke the silence. "What were they?" He shook his head. "I don't know, and we're not going to stop to find out." But the road wasn't done with us yet. We drove another 10 miles, and the atmosphere only grew heavier. The forest pressed closer, the moonlight hidden behind thick clouds. The headlights seemed weaker, barely cutting through the dark. I caught myself glancing into the side mirror over and over, half expecting to see those figures chasing us. At one point, the radio turned on again. But this time, instead of static, there was a voice. Low, distant, distorted. Neither Dad nor I could make out the words, but they chilled me to the core. Dad quickly shut the radio off, and this time, he pulled the knob out of the dash completely. Still, I thought I could hear faint whispers, just at the edge of hearing. "Almost home," Dad muttered, more to himself than to me. But we weren't almost home. Not yet. Just as the clock ticked past midnight, the car's headlights flickered. The engine sputtered. My stomach dropped. Dad cursed under his breath and tapped the gas pedal, but the car slowed until we rolled to a stop in the middle of the road. "No, no, no," he said, turning the key in the ignition. The engine groaned but refused to start. I sat there, frozen, staring out at the trees. The night was silent, too silent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then I saw movement again. Shadows. Dozens of them. They emerged from the tree line on both sides of the road, drifting closer, their shapes taller, clearer now. "Dad," I whispered, my voice shaking. He saw them too. His hands fumbled with his phone, but when he tried to dial, the screen flickered and went black. Dead. The figures moved closer, surrounding the car. They didn't make a sound, but the air grew colder, so cold that my breath fogged up the window. I pressed back into my seat, my eyes locked on the figure closest to me. It leaned toward the car, its hollow face inches from the glass. For a moment, I swore I heard it speak. Not out loud, but inside my head. A voice that wasn't a voice. Words that weren't words, but feelings, loss, hunger, emptiness. My chest tightened, and I gasped, shaking my head violently to break the connection. Dad reached for my shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. "Don't look at them," he said firmly. "Whatever you do, don't look." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the seatbelt so hard my fingers ached. I could feel the cold pressing in, the presence of the shadows circling the car. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The cold lifted. The silence broke with the sound of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. When I opened my eyes, the road was empty. The figures were gone. The car engine roared back to life on its own, headlights flaring as though nothing had happened. Dad and I exchanged a look, neither of us daring to speak. He put the car in drive, and we continued home in silence. We never spoke of that night again. Not to Mom, not to anyone. But sometimes, late at night, when I lie in bed, I can still feel their gaze pressing against me. And sometimes, when I pass that stretch of road, I swear I see shadows lingering at the edge of the trees, waiting.